you probably had lots of free apps with ads. You probably were paying for zero or maybe one subscription. If you're buying Starbucks coffee, you were probably walking up and giving your name, and they were misspelling Bryan with an I and giving it to you. Now, if you walk into a Starbucks, you probably pre-ordered it. What does that mean? It means they know your location, they know your credit card number, they know your phone number. If you've actually shared that card with other people and given a coffee card to somebody else, then they have that information. So a coffee company has more location and personal data and payment data about you than your bank did 10, 15 years ago, right?
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Technology Acceleration Podcast. Super excited to be here with you today. Quick introduction. I'm Bryan Beal, Customer Engineering Director at Google Cloud. Today, I'm joined by Anshu Sharma. A quick bio on Anshu. He's the CEO and co-founder of Skyflow, and a great background as a serial entrepreneur, a startup investor, previously a VP of Product and Strategy at Salesforce. And Anshu, you've invested in some amazing companies, some that I know well, like Nutanix and others, and we'll get into that. But first, Anshu, why don't you tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit more about you, what you're working on today at Skyflow, and a little bit more about your bio and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on your new podcast. Very exciting times, and great topic, acceleration. So let's see where this conversation goes. About me, I think, in some ways, my entire career has been about acceleration. I spent first decade of my career at Oracle, where we built the first web services tech stack, working with your new boss, Thomas Kurian. And then I tried and failed at getting Oracle to launch an Oracle Cloud in 2006 and 7 timeframe. The consensus at that time was, it's good for SMBs and not really enterprises. So being an accelerationist, I quit and joined Salesforce, where I ended up running most of the platform team, security, data, identity, app exchange, those kind of products that you're familiar with from Salesforce. So we got to launch some first app store in the world, even before Apple had an app store. First connected applications, a lot of things that we take for granted today, like SAML and OAuth 2.0 to connect things. And these were all new things that we either had to invent or we were pioneers in, co-building them. And then I left Salesforce in 2013. I wanted to do something on my own, ran through a few bad ideas, and then continued to invest in companies like Nutanix, Tekion, Algolia, many others, Razorpay. Through the process, I just kept getting driven to either work with founders or being a founder. And so eventually I took the leap with a couple of companies, Cleared, which we sold to Barracuda. It was an email security company that was using the first generation of AI to essentially figure out if you're getting a spam email or a phishing email by actually using the context and the words and not just using metadata. And then I started a company called Suki AI, which is a healthcare AI platform for doctors to be able to do their job more easily. And as I was building Salesforce's platform and Suki and other things, kept running into the problems of people having to secure enterprise data of consumers. And so, we'll talk about Skyflow more later, but essentially that's what led to the birth of Skyflow. And I've been doing this for slightly over 5 years, and it's very exciting times to be doing what we're doing.
No, that's amazing. Thank you. I like to say that you're only a true cloud veteran if you have that story of trying to convince your older legacy tech company to try to get into cloud, and they told you were crazy. That's how you know you're a real industry veteran. I have those as well. So it's great to hear I'm not the only one that tried and failed to get let's say a legacy tech company to move into cloud. So that's awesome. So I just want to dive, a little deeper on Skyflow. And I guess really what jumped out to you specifically that told you that there was a need for this? I know you mentioned consumer data. Is that where you got your start, was around consumer data? And maybe just dive a little bit deeper on what you were seeing from companies out there that led you to know that there was a need for these privacy vaults?
Yeah, so nobody needs a privacy vault because they don't know what a privacy vault is. Um, I think the need started with a lot of customers. As we moved from the mid market at Salesforce to the enterprise, we had to build new functionality to make sure that the largest healthcare companies in the world, the largest multinational companies in the world, would feel secure about their data. And in fact, I remember talking to a bunch of banks around how they need to share data to make, peer-to-peer money transfers work, or large healthcare systems who want what is called in the industry longitudinal patient record, which simply is a painful way of expressing that a doctor should know where you got your X-ray from, and the nurse should know that you already have your, vaccinations taken. But they call that a longitudinal patient record. But to build that, a lot of sensitive data behind the scenes has to move back and forth. And that was true 10 years ago. That was true 5 years ago. What fundamentally changed was two things. One was we don't remember this world because we gotten so used to it. But you go back, look 10, 15 years ago at your own purchasing history or your phone. You probably had lots of free apps with ads. You probably were paying for zero or maybe one subscription, right? If you're buying Starbucks coffee, you were probably walking up and giving your name, and they were misspelling Bryan with an I and giving it to you. Now, if you walk into a Starbucks, you probably pre-ordered it. What does that mean? It means they know your location, they know your credit card number, they know your phone number. If you've actually shared that card with other people and given a coffee card to somebody else, then they have that information. So a coffee company has more location and personal data and payment data about you than your bank did 10, 15 years ago, right? Banks really didn't know what you were spending money on, where you lived. Like I've moved across states, and 10 years ago, they wouldn't really even know. Uh, so what does that mean? What that means is we used to all run business systems for our consumers, what I call one record at a time. So you go buy an airline ticket. You bought an airline ticket. The ticket has a number. That's your order number effectively. If you want to cancel that ticket, you would call up a call center. And if you didn't have the PNR number, you were out of luck because they didn't have a way of searching. There's no such thing as search. There's no such thing as being able to magically look up based on some last four digits of your phone number. So it's taken a lot of time, but essentially all companies, when they say they become data companies, what's actually happened is instead of operating at what I call transaction level, which is what are you buying today from me, you started transacting at a historical level, which means I know every ticket Brian Beal has ever bought. I know whether he upgrades or doesn't upgrade. I know whether he flies, business class or economy. An airline knows that. Coffee company knows that. Your dog walker actually knows a lot of information about you if you ordered it through an app. Your handyman, right? So all of these businesses are collecting more PII, personally identifiable information. They're using it not in the context of just this one interaction, but through the power of magical data warehouses like Snowflake, Databricks, BigQuery. They can actually build a rich profile on you, which means that they can actually personalize offers for you. And increasingly, that's not where it stops. We also are going to make your unstructured data. So maybe the last 7 emails you've sent complaining about your bank or your Comcast or your airline is going to get condensed into an unstructured profile about you, which means they're going to have to build models and fine tune them. All of this means orders of magnitude more information about each of us, used in orders of magnitude more transactions, and across structured to unstructured. So what was maybe, since a lot of your viewers might be technical, let me make it this way. A bank may have had one row of personal information about you kept in some KYC document, typically in a branch. Maybe we move to a database. Today, they probably have thousands of rows about you because every transaction they keep it because they want to be able to personalize. So we've moved from one row at a time to thousands of rows, and soon enough, thousands of PDFs and images. And all of that means that as a bank or as a coffee shop or as an online brokerage house, I have now customer information everywhere. So you could see that in the number of breaches. So if you've been reading the stories about Facebook breach and the T-Mobile breach and the Change Healthcare breach this year, why suddenly, right? People spending more money on cybersecurity than ever. Why do we have more breaches? Well, it's because the amount of personal information and historical information and the number of places we are using that has gone up thousands of times, while our cybersecurity budgets have gone up maybe like 2x. And so the CISOs are far behind, the CTOs are behind, and the CIOs are behind. So all of that came together for me when I saw the $5 billion fine on Facebook. And I pretty much incorporated the company a few months later saying, this is no longer just a pet peeve of Anshu. This is actually a problem that people are, the front page of New York Times had that story and the Equifax story and every other story. And the fines went from hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe, to like billions of dollars. And that's all played out now.
No, that's great. That's an awesome background. And you're right. I see the impact happening to these breaches. My view is it seems like there's really kind of three big impacts that's happening when we see these breaches. One is just the reputational hit, the brand damage that happens, which is somewhat subjective. It's kind of hard to really quantify, what
Mhm,
happens when you have a big. I mean, when I was at Snowflake, we had this happen, right? And it ended up being because of poor, username and password policies and not having two-factor authentication turned on, right? It wasn't really a breach of the Snowflake platform,
mhm,
but that kind of didn't matter in the court of public opinion, right? It was
mhm,
a Snowflake breach. So there's that part that's really damaging, that kind of
mhm,
brand hit that you take. Then there have been like the civil liabilities, right? People will sue and there was that
mhm,
civil impact. But now
mhm,
I'm glad you called this out. There's increasingly becoming a kind of regulatory impact, a the government coming back after some of these companies with big fines and even more regulation. And I would love to get your view on this regulatory kind of burden that's impacting companies. And I'll give you a little more background. I mean, I see it all the time in companies that are, as you rightly pointed out, are gathering all of this very, very detailed information on their customers. They're getting it from their structured data. They're getting unstructured. They're getting sentiment analysis online, on social media. So they're building these profiles. But now, when you have these big companies that operate in not just different countries, but even different states in some cases, you're seeing states like Illinois really restrict PII and what you can do with it in other states. So now it's like, man, I got to look on a state by state on what I can do with this customer's information, and then country by country. And EU has all of their, regulatory and data residency requirements. So I mean, that regulatory burden, I'm sure, is tough for companies. I'm curious, how do you look at that, or how are your customers approaching that regulatory aspect of privacy?
Yeah. So, I'm for smaller government in general, but, as they say, small enough that it doesn't place undue burden, but not so small that it can't catch the thieves, right? So I think in the same vein, look, for us, it's actually been just, frankly speaking, great for our business. Uh, but I think what's happened is because the fundamental problem is not governments, the problem is the breaches and the bad guys.
Hmm.
You know, if you know, if you remember the OPM hack, which is U.S. Government Office of Personnel Management, we literally lost every US government employee's social security number, date of birth, email address, including departmental information. It doesn't take a genius to figure out why some foreign nation states might be interested in finding out personal details of people that work in Virginia at certain locations.
The State Department in yeah, Northern Dakota.
And the AT&T hack has been publicly people have talked about how they were targeting call data records of very specific individuals. The net of all that is the response to that has been, given that most companies didn't have enough controls in place, just happens to be the case, the governments are imposing laws. Some laws are actually carefully thought through and have some good points to them, such as consent and the fact that you should keep the data fully encrypted and tokenized at all times. Some other laws you could argue are more for the business benefit of their local telco companies, such as all telco traffic against this user must all be within my country. So mix of reasons, enough justification though for them to create these rules. What we see is CTOs just struggling. You want to launch a telehealth application to help people get GLP-1 drugs. Soon enough, you have to be complying with a host of laws. In fact, even think about somebody as simple as a coffee company, like I mentioned earlier, right? The credit card number is subject to PCI laws. If somebody's younger than 18, teenagers do buy coffee, turns out. Then there are laws like COPA that require you to collect specific information, protect the data. If they are international, so a coffee buyer in Germany's data cannot actually be in India and vice versa. Some laws are about where the data gets stored. Some laws about who can access the data, and some laws about where it can get processed. Again, we're just talking about a coffee company. You take that to telehealth, or you're trying to build a Robinhood-like application, and suddenly there is another set of laws that are applicable to us. Our view and our innovation is fairly simple. We think this is a slippery slope. If you have more PII and more systems in more places, you will be subject to higher and higher fines, and the problems get worse. So, the founding thesis of Skyflow is, what we call isolate, protect, and govern PII, right? So, the easiest analogy I have for people is like who have, small children. If you give them a crayon, they will paint on the walls no matter what you tell them. And then if you want to clean that up, it could take you a lot of time. The key is to buy crayons that actually don't write on the walls. The equivalent of that for Skyflow is we turn PII data into non-PII data. So one of our customers, actually shared customer with Google, is GoodRx. Healthcare company, collect and process a lot of information that's sensitive because they help you get a discount on your GLP-1 drug or your insulin. But to do that, they have to have lots of sensitive information go back and forth. And they just want to be 100% sure that the plain text PII is never at risk. So in their case, they actually process all of that through Skyflow. Skyflow converts PII into non-PII. As a result, all downstream use cases, whether it's in BigQuery or Databricks or AI applications they want to build or customer service use cases, there is just no plain text, which means the fact that Illinois has a slightly different rules than state of Washington when it comes to healthcare data, it's easier for those customers to comply with those rules because their PII is not in 100 different places. And that was sort of our insight. And that insight has only accelerated in the last 24 months with people trying to use customer data to service customer needs using AI. And we can talk more about Gen AI.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a tech acceleration podcast if we didn't talk about AI. So no, that's a perfect segue. I mean, that's a really interesting way you put it. How you take PII and turn it into data that doesn't have PII. I mean, that's a great synopsis of
Right. If your Snowflake instance has no plain text, there's only so much bad that can happen. Sometimes I tell our CTOs to close your eyes and visualize two headlines. You'll all have breaches. Do you want the headline to say your systems were breached, but no social security number, no phone number, and no email address was leaked? Or the other way around? And that's something that you can actually do and is within your capabilities.
Yeah. And those breaches are not going to slow down. Those attacks are not, they're only going to accelerate. And I've said for a long time that there's only so much that a private organization can do to fend off a nation state style attack. I mean, there's limited budgets for the CISO office in even a Fortune 500 company. And if you're AT&T, like that example, and a nation like China decides that they're going to unleash the full might and power of their army against you, of their hackers against you, it's going to be really hard to fend that off. They'll socially engineer a way in. So to your point, well, if the data then they extract out is just dust, then you kind of eliminate the motivation to do the attack in the first place, which would be great if they just realize like, well, even if we get in, what we're going to get out is worthless. So that's one. But like you said, then if the attack is successful, if what ends up on the dark web is minus all of your PII, yeah, I mean, it's much less impactful, for sure.
Yeah, none of us want to have a breach, but a breach with PII is about 100 times more expensive to your brand reputation and your life. So yes, I think that's basically the
Yeah,
thesis.
yeah, no, that is. And yeah, so let's talk about AI a little bit and the value of data in some of these AI models. So when I'm talking to customers and when I'm talking to even like board members, I think pretty much every customer I talk to these days at the board level has an AI mandate. It doesn't matter if you're building tractors or software, you have to have a plan for how you're going to use AI. You just do. Everybody has one. And there is this kind of push pull that's happening right now where on the one hand, the more data we can give the model, in some ways you get better data out of it or more information out of it, right? So there's this desire for some companies, not all, but for some companies to really personalize the AI. But there's this concern, well, what do we personalize it with? And how do we protect things like not just PII, but intellectual property comes up quite a bit. And so I'm curious how you're thinking, as you start to pivot towards protecting information in this age of AI. What are the hand grenades that are out there for your customers, right? That you're coming in and
Yeah.
you're saying like, hey, stop, you need to protect this. I'm curious what you're seeing and how you're approaching it in this new AI world.
So I think the reason every board member is asking that question is because they can feel the technology in their hands, right? You know, when SaaS happened and cloud happened, the board member of the largest pharma company or car company was seeing no change in their life, right? They were using Microsoft Word, they were sending email using Outlook, Salesforce happened and Amazon happened. Nothing changed for them. Maybe somebody was buying books on the internet. This change is fundamentally different because they themselves have experienced something like ChatGPT, or if they've gone to Google and search, your search results now have Gemini results near the top. So no matter how buried in the sand your head is, you're going to see some generated images and documents, and it's going to open your eyes, and you're going to be like, oh my God, I run an insurance company, all my data is in PDFs. Clearly, we don't need to do what we were doing a year ago the same way. So I think the immediacy of the experience of this product, with especially all these chat-like things that first came out, and now it's in your search engine, in your documents, in your spreadsheets. I can't turn on any Google product without some AI feature being presented to me. And I think as a result, it's there. And so they can visualize what the future should look like, hence the mandate. The impact of that was first and foremost people just experimenting. We call that the play phase, right? My board members saw something on the internet. Let me wow them by showing them a demo of creating a customized offer for a customer that's about to leave my subscription, or a personalized plan for a wealth management client to onboard them. And these demos go fabulously well, right? You can show lots of key capabilities. And then the first question is like, oh my God, is this data going to like some big corporation. And everybody said, no, 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 don't worry about it. You can always get your own model instance. And we kind of like, depending on how you feel about on-prem versus cloud, you can get your own instance of most of these models these days, right? Whether it's Anthropic, whether it's DeepSeek, or whatever your favorite model of the week is. And for a brief moment, people thought, that's good. We have our own model. We have our own applications. What could go wrong? What people keep forgetting is 90% of what goes wrong in an enterprise is because of internal breaches. Either somebody working at your company has access to the wrong data, or someone pretending to be working at your company has access to the wrong data. Hence the value of phishing attacks and such. So now, as people are going from play to production, they're realizing that all the controls we put in place in our business applications, right? What does an application like Salesforce or Workday do? It's not the database stuff, despite what Satya says, right? It's not just CRUD. It's the fact that I can't see your salary and you can't see my pipeline unless I let you. So most business applications are, I would say, 30% database, 30% workflow, and 40% controls around attribute-based access control, roles-based access control, policy-based access control. And when you take all of the data and put it into a soup, which is what a vector database is, or a RAG is, or a model is, the soup has no boundaries. And so when you ask questions of a soup, it doesn't know that you shouldn't be revealing my salary to somebody else. And if you're going to build agents that are going to operate on that soup, who's going to tell the agent that my credit card number should not be used to book your airline ticket? So I think as a result, we have to basically build new control layers. And we think of Skyflow's AI gateway as a new control layer. It's the same exact technology as our data privacy vault, but now it's in the form of an AI gateway, and people use it in two ways. One is when you're feeding unstructured data or structured data into your models or RAGs, just get rid of a lot of the sensitive information. Except you just can't get rid of things by redacting them. The old style DLP doesn't work, because if we were feeding my customer calls with my bank, it has to still know about who I am, where I live, and the fact that I am talking about my wife to a bank manager who's talking to the accountant. If you remove all the information, the model can't really help you. So you have to do what we call entity preserving transformations, which is what we enable. So they can build the model on what I call real fake data. So that's the building part, or the RAG part, or the feeding the data part. Then the second is when you're building your chatbot or agent. Funnily enough, if you think about the word agent, agent simply means somebody who can act on your behalf. And so think about your EA, if you have one, or you have somebody in your home that acts on your behalf. Your kid can't buy a movie unless you give them your credit card. Your EA can't rebook your flight unless you share your TSA pre-number and frequent flyer number and credit card number. Well, if an agent is going to do those things on your behalf or on the behalf of the enterprise, right? There'll be a personal agent and an enterprise agent. By definition, they have to handle sensitive information. Some of it will be PII. Some of it will be things like, I want to sell, $4 million worth of Apple shares. Well, in that context, the fact I'm selling Apple shares and you're looking to buy is very sensitive information. So some of our customers focus on PII, others focus on ticker symbols of equity. Some others think about drug names. If you're running a clinical trial, if somebody finds out that your GLP-1 candidate, Metrozide, something, is about to get approved, that's billions of dollars worth of information. So all of this has to be kept out of the models. At the same time, the models have to be able to answer questions about these things, right? You want to be able to say, hey, did my Apple transaction go through? And we are able to, using our polymorphic engine, allow customers to basically have their cake and eat it too. So there is no sensitive information that's getting exposed to the model infrastructure. And yet you can ask questions using the sensitive information of the model.
Yeah, that sounds like the perfect balance. I mean, again, I go back to, like I said, it's that balance of like just dumping all the data into the model and the idea that it becomes super smart then, but then you get into that problem of, well, there's a lot of data that just doesn't ever belong in some models. Some data you genuinely want out, but if then it doesn't know me or what I like or what I'm trying to do, then the model has no value. So that's that constant balance. I love the way you've thought about it. Sounds like you built some cool proprietary tools too, like the polymorphic you just mentioned. That's really fascinating. We should talk about that offline some other time. But and I'm glad you brought up about how AI has become real to all users, whether you're a board member or you're in accounting or you're in sales. We've all played with it. I mean, I've helped my son do homework. I'm looking at his math and I'm like, I don't know. I need to ask Gemini. I don't know how to do this. Right? We've all used it.
Mhm.
To be honest with you, I don't know if I've seen anything in the tech space become this real to this many users since maybe when the Uber app first came out. Because I remember when Uber first came out, smartphones were relatively new, iPhone was relatively new, and we that was kind of our first chance to really see, wait a second, I can have an app on this phone that knows my location in real time, that can get a driver directly to me. I can complete the transaction in the app. And that was when I think everybody was like, holy cow, the appification of everything just started. I think every CEO that used Uber was like, man, why aren't we using this? Like Starbucks, coffee, a great example. Like every consumer facing entity, I think, suddenly realized, and not since that Uber moment that I first had, however many years ago that was, have I seen a technology get into the hands of so many people so quickly where the light bulb just instantly goes off. Like we have to be able to leverage this in some way. So I'm glad that you pointed that out. I'd be curious to know, as a company that primarily, right, you're selling to enterprises, you're selling to bigger companies. I'm curious, how your customers are viewing the just broader macroeconomic conditions right now. Because sometimes, you'll hear companies say, well, we're pausing, our technology spend right now because we're going to wait things out. Where I always come back to them and say, well, our stuff is your path to efficiency and selling more and being more profitable. This is not the thing that you want to pause on. This is the thing you want to accelerate on, even during uncertainty. But I'm curious how you're looking at, when a stock market goes down. I know it's short term. Are your customers or the people that you're talking to, or even you as a CEO, are you looking at that thinking, oh, I'm nervous, or are you looking at it saying, nope, it's still full speed ahead. These are short term conditions that'll work themselves out. But how are you and your customers thinking about it?
So I think the short answer is that our customers don't buy Skyflow because it is a nice to have. And you are either deathly afraid of a breach or you're not. You've either been required to comply with a law or you're not. You've been subject to some incident like your previous employer, and now you're like, oh my God, like I can't have another data warehouse breach where my plain text is just sitting there. In those circumstances, the fact that, they have to spend an extra XYZ dollars is there's effectively unlimited budget for effective data security. The hard part is most security companies are essentially what I call compliance drama with a hint of security. And so, maybe I was running a scan once a day and now I can afford to run a scan of something once every 2 weeks because all I was trying to do was generate some alerts and document something. So in our case, it turns out these are either high core risks to the very company that these people work for, or oftentimes actually they're revenue producing. So a lot of our customers are actually not just enterprises. We have customers as small as 5% startups. If you have a 5% startup that's doing, let's say, telehealth, well, if you want to expand from one state to another, guess what you need? If you want to sell to not just SMB customers, a telehealth product as a benefit, but you want to sell it to Verizon or a Pfizer, well, you will need all the controls in place so you can convince them that their data is safe with you. You want to expand geographically to another country. So a lot of our use cases where we're selling to smaller companies, it's revenue producing for them. For the larger enterprises, it's life and death. Now, stepping back, now that just happens to be our case, but what about things that are not life and death? I think my perception is customers are definitely being cautious where they can afford to slow down. So let's say if I was going to, if I have a database migration project to go from one database company to another database company, maybe I can afford to wait. You know, if I didn't adopt document databases last 11 years, maybe I can wait another 11 months. On the other hand, if the imperative for your initiative is you're going to roll out an AI chatbot that's going to help rebook their flights so that, you don't have the crisis that we had with an airline a few weeks ago where the CEO almost got fired. Well, in those circumstances, there's no amount of GDP going from -1% growth to +3% growth or vice versa that changes things. And that's been my perspective, right? As a startup, um, we were born during COVID effectively. A year into Skyflow's existence, COVID happened. And a lot of people wrote memos saying, hey, you should slow down till COVID gets resolved. And I was like, we have nothing to lose. We have zero customers. We have zero product. Our sole job at that time was to get to our first customers. Today for us, we're growing rapidly, doubling in revenue every 12 months or so. And for us, a +4% GDP growth rate versus a +2% or -1% means instead of growing 114%, I'll grow 109%. Frankly, I wouldn't even be able to measure the impact of GDP growth on our revenue. But certainly there are industries where this is going to have an impact, but I think the impact will be most felt on the things in the middle. So things that you must do because they are life and death security, or things that you want to do because AI is going to so completely change the game. They can't afford to cut budget or slow down on those two ends. But there's a lot of stuff in the middle where you're upgrading from version 7.3 to version 7.9, and you bought Edge Server 5064 model, and now you need to get 50799 model, and honestly, nobody knows the ROI of some of those things, and you can wait another 6 months.
That's a great perspective. Yeah, I share similar view on a lot of that.
That's how you're running a commodity business. If people can afford to just slow down buying your product for 3 to 6 months or years, you don't have a differentiated killer product in the market.
Great point. Great point. Well, speaking of, differentiated products and great companies, just shifting gears a little bit. I mean, you're a prominent investor. You've invested in dozens of companies. What's exciting you right now? What's out there in terms of industries or new areas of innovation? Like what does Anshu see and outside of your own company, of course? What are you seeing right now that's really exciting to you?
Well, I think you have to live under the rock to not say the answer is Gen AI related. But for me, given my extreme focus on enterprise, that usually means some form of use of enterprise that can be fundamentally transformed with AI. Just to give you some examples, one of our customers is Hippocratic AI, shared customer with Google. They're building healthcare models. The ROI and the impact is so massive that they are just, seem to be doing really great. I invested in a company called Emma, actually an ex-Google person. He's building, agent bots for a lot of use cases across multiple industries from legal to healthcare. And I think they're seeing momentum. So I invested in that. There's a company called AI MDR. They're building a SOC agent using AI, and that's very exciting. I think there's basically two classes of companies that are interesting. One is people who are fundamentally innovating at the core computer science level, be the Anthropics of the world or, the foreign models. I am not investing tens of billions of dollars, so that's interesting to me, but that's not where my investment dollars go. I'm focused on what are the industries where AI can fundamentally change the game? And my cheat sheet there is, does this company mostly run on PDFs? Any process that runs mostly on PDFs, or any industry that runs mostly on PDFs. So think in your business. I can guarantee your finance department invoices and stuff are still happening through PDFs. So if you apply invoice processing through AI for a large enough company that processes like a few $1 billion of invoices, you're going to save millions of dollars. There's like zero doubt a company that's processing $1 billion worth of PDFs will save millions of dollars. Call centers, unstructured, voice, PDFs, email, same thing. You're going to save tens of millions of dollars, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. And then verticals, legal, there are companies like Harvey that seem to be doing really well. There are companies in mortgage processing. My brother used to work at a company called Ellie Mae. They process a lot of mortgages. I can't imagine, if you sign a mortgage, you know how much paperwork is involved. I think horizontal processes that involve unstructured data, PDF, email, voice, and then verticals where we tend to use a lot of PDFs and unstructured data, those are the most ripe for disruption.
Hmm. Yeah, I've seen the same. I've seen those I like how you put it, horizontal and vertical. That's exactly how I think about it. There are those horizontal. Did I just invent a new word?
That's a new
Horizontal.
word.
Yeah, yeah, that's not a bad one actually. I've come up with worse ones. So there are those horizontal processes, right? And there are companies that are absolutely innovating that would apply that to any industry. And I think you named some, right? Like the whole accounts payable, accounting type things that go in and that are very document heavy, and they could sell that to a insurance company or a healthcare company. And then there are those really interesting kind of vertical companies as well. I actually get to work with some, in that space in my job, and where they're just laser focused on one industry and they go deep in those use cases. And I agree, there's really a need for both. It's funny. I've talked to both of those, and I see right now there really is a need for that level of expertise in both the deep vertical knowledge where people, they just live healthcare, they know the regulatory burden, they know the user burden, and then the horizontal. So I totally agree. I think those are I look at it in the same way. Well, with that, anything else, Anshu, that we didn't get to cover that you want to talk about? I'm happy to I'm happy to talk about
No,
any topic.
no, this is an exciting time. I think one thing I did want to add, since you brought up enterprises, we work with a lot of startups. We have 5% companies building, in one case, something that's similar to Clear in India. It's called Equal.in. They started out running on Skyflow, so the data is protected from day one. AI companies, two people in a garage, or two people with $40 million these days in a garage, joke, all the way to the Walmarts and the Flip and the largest companies in the world. We work with a lot of them, and it's, we are ready to partner with a lot of companies of all sizes.
Yeah, and companies of all sizes need this. I mean, big companies might have the resources to survive a breach, but that small startup might not. I mean, a breach could be the end of their business. All the more reason they need someone like you helping them out, right? I mean, that literally could be life or death for a startup. So that's great. Well, Anshu, really appreciate your time today. This has been awesome, and maybe we'll have you back on a future episode.
Well, good luck with this podcast launch, and I look forward to listening to other people's conversations with you.
Thank you.